Tuesday, March 30th, and this is the Phrase Craze session. It's kind of going to be an experimental laboratory type thing. I am your moderator. My name is Clark Baker. I'm from Belmont, Massachusetts, and with me today is Jim Mayo from Hempstead, New Hampshire. This is a little bit of a continuation from the session we did last year on timing, or beat math, I believe it was called. I had the idea for doing something like this, and the EC let me give it another try. And I thought Jim would be the right guy to do it with. It's going to be a little bit disorganized. So, I hate to, be blocked by my laptop. I was unable to bring the laptop I wanted. Here's what I want to say. Almost all my talks are on the web, on my website. You can Google Clark Baker Square Dance. I have cards here with the web address. This talk, I made a web page for it, and you can look at it there. And if we learn some things from here and we take notes, maybe we'll update what is in there, because who knows how the experiments are going to turn out. So there is a handout, but there's nothing to hand to you to take away with today other than the stupid business card. I don't want to exactly read my talk, but let me start with that because it helps me compose my thoughts a bit. So this workshop, we're going to explore the relationship of patter in singing calls to the musical phrase. We'll start with a brief definition of terms. We'll move on to some dancing. And we might wonder about, does the style of delivery in which the caller gives the dancers the first beat of a phrase, is that better? Does it feel better dancing it than just giving the dancer any one of the 8 beats? And how often can a skilled caller hit the phrase? How can you acquire this skill? What are some examples of strongly phrased music? And this is a laboratory in which we'll be counting on you as dancers to help determine which variables really matter. So in a sense, we don't quite know the outcomes, although we have some guesses. I thought of this, so I'm going to start, and I'll pick on Jim, or he's certainly free to drop or add in whenever I say something that he doesn't agree with. As most of you know, I was drawn to the choreographic complexity aspect of square dancing. I moved through the various dance programs and ended up mainly dancing and calling in the challenge programs. While I was eventually able to hear and dance to and call with the beat of the music, I did not hear or make use of the phrase of the music. And it was mentioned occasionally in callers' meetings and callers' schools and at stuff at CALLERLAB, but it didn't really mean much to me. And I see Don Beck's in the audience, and I went to one of his caller seminars. It went time and time again. And I still remember when I was calling, head, square through 4, and the music's playing, and I'm not with the beat of the music, and he's like, so he went up to me, and he's like tapping me on the shoulder, and I'm like, head, square through 4, swing through here, and then he stops tapping, and I slowly drifted off the beat, and he's like, I couldn't do that if I tried, but that was how hard it was for me to hear and dance with the beat of the music, let alone anything that was more than that. So in the mid-1990s, I started to attend local contra dances. Don, again, had brought me to contra dances in the early 80s or mid-80s, and I hated them. But somehow by 95, I needed that aspect of music and synchronized with the dancing. So I was enjoying them in 95. It would have been fascinating to meet my 1985 version of myself and have a discussion of why this was so bad for you then and so good for you now. But and I gradually began to hear and appreciate the music, and the contra dance music is strongly phrased. I understand we haven't defined phrase yet. I'll get to that in a second. I appreciated the music and the strong phrasing of the music, and how the dance routines were put together to match that phrasing. Before we go too far, we need to define what we mean by phrase, and Jim Mayo has 1966 calling notes for modern square dancing, and those are available online on the Square Dance Foundation New England website, and I copied what he wrote because I thought it was pretty good. So this is from Jim speaking from 1966. Phrase. Each 4 steps the dancer takes makes up a subphrase, and 2 subphrases, 8 steps, make a phrase in square dance music. The first beat in each phrase is a little bit louder or heavier than the other 7, and in most recorded square dance music, you can hear these heavy beats quite plainly. Your dancers can hear them too. With rare exceptions, all square dance music is made up of 8-beat phrases. Usually there are 8 phrases, 8 of these phrases, i.e. 64 beats, in a musical pattern. And after every 64 beats, the musicians go back to the beginning and play the same pattern again, repeating as many times as necessary. The 64-beat musical phrase is called a chorus and is found in both patter and singing call music. And Jim has a strongly phrased record. It's on Rawhide 520. It's, how do you say that? Orendo Hoedown. And we'll just play this for a minute, and then we'll talk about where the phrase is. Moment. Over the head. Now, the hard experiment Dick Ledger always does is I'm going to just drop it in the middle, and your guys are going to say 1 whenever you think it's really 1. Well, I won't put it there this time. You guys are good. Okay. That's a strongly phrased record. And I think I have a few other examples out of my collection that we might play in a minute or later. So that was the definition of phrase. And the subphrase thing, I don't think is going to be too important to us. What I'm interested in for the moment is going to be these 8-beat phrases. And coincidentally, many of our calls take 8 beats to dance. Ladies chain, right and left through, do-si-do. My contra dance experience has allowed me to better hear the phrase of the music while calling patter. So I'm out there contra dancing, and somehow my brain's slowly changing to hear the phrasing that I didn't used to be able to hear. The music I play for modern Western is not at all related to contra dance music, but now I can suddenly start picking up and hearing the phrase that's going on there. And so I've become more interested in this subject. Last year we offered a workshop on beat math. That's also up on the website. Do the timing numbers really work out? And this year I thought it'd be interesting to do some experiments around phrasing. So I want to look at some examples from callers who understand phrasing. Dick Ledger was known for that, and he was interviewed in 1996. I found this again on the Square Dance Foundation New England website, and he had the following to say. I learned so much about the fact of giving them the music, giving the number 1 beat of music to the dancers to move to. And this is what I've been doing, and this is what ties in the whole crowd so they move. In other words, you're moving, you're telling them what to do when you know. You're telling them what to do, but the music is telling them when to go. And once they go, then it's your job to give, and always give them the next call just before they need it. So they are still using the music, and people don't get tired dancing that way. And what I call it is like pre-cueing. It's like a round dance, really, and this is what eventually developed into my style of calling. It's that I could pre-cue the call and still sing the song. And even in the patter calls, I could pre-cue, and then I have it now, so it's almost always second nature. And the system of running caller schools, teaching timing, is that you can put it down so they can actually get it. And you know the number 1 beat. The phrase of the music is so great to dance to that when a caller starts calling to it, he wants to use it, to call to it. And it's just common sense. The caller has to say, well, the dancers are paying the bill, so the dancers really deserve that number 1 beat. So he has to back up his calls to 5, 6, 7, or 8, and then the dancer would step out on 1. And then a different quote from Dick is, I think that we got, and this was an interview done over a phone, so this isn't edited. I'm talking, sometimes you say ums and ahs. That's why this is a little stilted. I think that we got so much of an insight actually moving to the music and phrasing that when I dance, I kind of pick and choose because I don't like to be cheated music-wise. I don't like to hear someone say sides, face, grand, square off the phrase, so I can't move to the number 1 beat. And just multiply this times how many basics you do where you really enjoy putting them together and work out to the phrase. And I really feel the best dancing is the pre-planned. When callers will just set down pre-planned, it's okay to use split phrasing, but put it with something that adds up to 16 or put it with something that adds up to 8. And I had here that we should dance a Dick Ledger patter tip. Do we have a square for a second? Okay. Give me one moment to get the music while you guys square up.
Yes, let me use this one if it works. The whole point of phrasing goes into oblivion if your timing isn't correct. Much of today's dancing is done by callers who do not know when they give a call what the square is going to look like when the people have finished that action. They wait until they're there, they then see them, and then give the next call. That guarantees stop, go, and if that's how you call, thinking about the phrase is a waste of time because you will never get to the phrase. And if you're dancing to this record that we just had and you're off the phrase, it's pretty annoying. Can I do this both? Yes. With this one, it's hard to do. And I can call off the phrase because I want to give you the phrase. Head to couples, right and left through. You get the phrase. Side couples, right and left through. All 4 ladies chain. Join hands and circle to the left. Now, if I get off the phrase and Alaman left your corner there, do-si-do with your partner. Well, accidentally I hit it. Men star left. Turn the partner right. Alaman left. Unfortunately, I can't get very far away from the phrase. You're right. But you can see how this record really calls your attention to it if the caller doesn't hit the phrase. And there are limited times when I'm willing to use this record because it takes good dancers who will, in fact, do the call in the right time. Otherwise, you're fighting the record all the way through, and I get very uncomfortable with it. So it's one that I love to use when I've got the right people in front of me. Butch.
Oh, Butch has to put the question on the tape.
It's already on this.
We already said the name. It's the one we said earlier. Okay. I think I found a Dick tip. This would be from 1983. It was off a Sets in Order record, one of the albums. I don't know about the volume level. Let me crank the go. No, don't worry. I have the technology. And I will start you at the beginning. Stop. And I'm going to turn this up a little more because it's always tough. Turn the bass down, the treble up. Dancing tapes is tough. And what I want us to think of is if we can see beat 1 or if we want to have someone who feels confident who's just like signal so we all know this is beat 1 and you can see maybe you're confident and we can see where they are in the thing. Hopefully this will be pretty obvious.
Side space, straight square. Reverse now. Four ladies chain across the ring. Now turn this girl and chain them back. You're gonna keep your own and promenade coming 2 by 2. Take that lady back home with you all the way around and home you go. Head ladies chain. Now the heads dance up to the middle and you come on back. You're gonna pass through, separate, go around 1, come into the middle and do-si-do. Same 4, make a right-hand star, turn it to your corner, go, Alaman left. Get home and do-si-do, go around your own. You're gonna take your corner, promenade with the corner, pretty little corner, and take a walk and don't step on her. The new head lady's ready, chain.
So I think we saw enough. Thank you. let me just see how soon I want you to dance again. Yes. Yes. The question was, can I play it without one of our dancers dancing? Do we want to get another replacement for you? And we'll just
a piece of it without.
Oh, you just want to stand there and hear it for a second. Do you want to go right from the beginning again?
It's a very good example of the caller giving the dancers beat number one. It's a style of calling that is hard to find these days. But Dick does a particularly good job of it. He's perfectly happy to confine himself to dance actions that mostly are done in 8 beats so that the dancers can have number one much of the time.
I'm going to play from the middle. I hope it starts right at the right place for you.
The new head loon, he's ready, chain across the middle of the ring, and the heads dance up to the middle and back again. You square through, 4 hands around, 4 hands in the middle of town, a circle forward the outside pair. You break, make a line right there, move forward, come back. Now cross trail through to the corner, swing and whirl the corner girl. Promenade this girl, promenade, you go round the world. Promenade and home you go, then all join.
So this was from 1983, where Cross Trail apparently was one of our mainstream calls that we did. We'll hit that one again in the 60s session. Was that enough for, you got the sense? And as I commented to Jim as it was going, he wasn't perfect on that one. You know, we know head square through 4 is a 10-beat call, and then he had to do something. I know heads do-si-do from a squared set is 8 beats, easy. Face your corner and do-si-do is 8 beats, but you could dance it in 6 if you had to. So there's some slop, and this kind of gets a little bit into the timing stuff. Say it on the mic.
He encouraged that catch-up from the square through problem by rushing you a little bit with the next call. We can affect the way the dancers react to music. And if we want them to move on beat 1, we can very strongly indicate that by the way we deliver the call.
Okay, you guys stay. The goal of phrase calling is to give the call so the dancers start moving on beat 1 of the 8-beat phrase. When the dancers execute 8-beat calls, they will start the next call on beat 1. This type of connection with the phrase of the music enhances the dance experience. We're saying without proof. I now want us to dance a singing call, because singing calls almost inherently are phrased. So Jim he's just going to put on the called side of it ends up one of his singing calls, and we'll see you guys dance it. But what we also want to be doing is counting the 8 so we see how that relates. These guys just have to keep dancing. But even when they're doing complicated stuff, we want to be counting the 8s and see whether they're lining up or not.
Well, let me talk just a second about the timing, because this starts off with an Alamo balance. And the correct timing to make the balance, the stamp of the first beat of the Alamo, land on count 1, you need to start the command Allemande left in Alamo style right to your partner balance a while. That's 8 beats to say. You started on count 1 of the phrase because Allemande left you hear without action. Then it takes 6 beats to do the Allemande left, and the balance will come on count number 1. You'll hear that.
So I think what he's saying is the record's perfect, and if you guys don't get it right, it's the dancer problem.
Do an Allemande in an Alamo style, and you balance there and then. Swing through, and now you're gonna balance once again. Swing through once more, then a grand old right and left. Hand over, hand around, and go until you hit your own. Why don't you turn your partner right? Then a corner Allemande.
1.
Come back and promenade to go walking around the land. Hey,
1.
do the dancing, I'll do the call.
1.
We're gonna have us a ball. Now head you promenade outside and go about halfway from me. Move
1.
up to the middle and come on back, then roll a half sachet. You see, now pass through, separate, round just 1 you go.
1.
Everybody run on it through and turn the girl, you know, why don't you slide through, pass through, and go left Allemande. Hey,
1.
you swing this lady around and promenade the land. Oh,
1.
this girl is the flirtiest one of them all.
1.
We're gonna have us pass a ball. Now heads you promenade once more, halfway around the floor. Move on to the middle and come right back, then roll a half sashay. You do a pass through, separate, round just one you go. Everybody run on it through and turn the girl you know, and then you slide through, pass through, and you go left down a man. Swing this lady round and promenade the land. Oh, this girl is surely the belle of the ball. We're gonna have us a ball to the corner Alabama.
Okay, that has enough interesting stuff. Is there any observations from the audience on that? We have the wireless mic. I should have played it at 43. I'm sorry, Lonnie.
Yeah, it's played at full old days tempo when all records were recorded at 132 beats a minute.
So I have two comments I saw. One is in our timing session last year, one of the points that Tim Mariner made is if you deliver the beginning like circle left and then you start singing and they start circling on beat 1, then you can do a full 64-beat figure or head square through 4, boom. In other words, if you pre-cue it. Whereas in Jim's case, on this particular record, he, on the first figure, took beat 1 for himself when they started moving. My second observation was there's a lot of 2-beat and 4-beat and other beat calls, and as we were going 1, trying to figure out where the thing was, where beat 1 was, you didn't always start calls on beat 1, but when we were getting near like the Alaman left and the swing and the promenade, those were suddenly we were lined up again, you promenade home. Yeah.
It's also true that when I call this at a dance, I give the dancers beat 1 much more than the record does. It's in the studio, there aren't any dancers there, and I'm tied to the music myself. But when I've got a floor of dancers, I'm always trying to give them beat 1. I believe that if I give them beat 1 for the first step, they will get it more often through the rest of the dance. But so when I call this record at a dance, I call it differently than the way it's recorded.
Okay, you guys can sit down for a second. I want to play a video. This is a video I found on YouTube, and we can watch it, and we can maybe count, find out where the ones are again, and see how often this particular caller lines up. This is another singing call because I honestly don't know. I actually think this is not, we'll see whether you'll figure out whether it's a singing call or not. This happened to be someone who was photographing from the top at Tech Squares where I dance. And I'm sorry I didn't have the right connectors to make it come out there. I'm just going to put it full screen, turn the screen around. It should work for you. Give me 1 sec. That's Ted Lizotte. And do any of you want to make observations on how it was synchronized with the 8-beat phrase and all that? Here, grab a mic.
It seemed to me that he was giving the command on beat 1. Which
I agree. I saw him call on beat 1.
Pretty consistently. And so they were starting to dance on, beats 2, 3, which is, I think, pretty much, I don't know, probably what I do and what a lot of us do, I think.
I think you're right. Most of today's dancers do.
I have a question. Lottie Ainsworth from Louisiana. Is this something that you should do, though, throughout the whole song? And I've just recently learned to do this because I like to have the beat. Being a singer, I like to have the beat. hog. But recently I have learned to give them the beat. But mostly it's on the breaks more than it's on the figure. Is it something that you should do the whole song or strive to do or just periodically?
Jim?
Does that make sense?
I don't think we're here to say you should do anything. What we're saying is let's look at it and see if we think it makes a difference. I think you've just said that you think it does make a difference enough to work at it some. And I think that's exactly right, my judgment, that we're all grabby. We like the phrase for ourselves. But if it feels good to us, it probably feels good to them too. So let's give it to them some of the time. And the obvious, easiest time to give it to them is on the breaks and on the promenades. The final element left promenade can be given so that they start the walk of the promenade on beat 1. That we can do without too much trouble if we think about it at all. My worry is the people whose timing is so bad that they never have the chance to think about a phrase at all. And hopefully we'll call somebody's attention to the fact that the phrase is something to think about in this session.
And I would also argue you could give the dancers, and Tim Mariner would argue you can give the dancers beat 1 by pre-cueing so that it's, head square through 4, boom, they go. Just like when you're singing the last bit of the song, you have to, on a sides face grand square, if the next thing is circle left, you have to stop singing and go circle left, and then they're going on beat 1. So that's the other thing. At the beginning of every sequence, you could give them beat 1. We have 2 more comments out there, at least. Don?
Don Beck, Massachusetts. I sort of had 3 comments. One is relative to that. In the breaks, his Alaman left, grand right, and left was on the phrase, and nothing else was close.
Nothing else was close. Correct.
Really, it wasn't. The way I think of phrasing, and I got a lot of this out of Jay King's book way back when, but it's good, is that phrasing is nice, it feels good to dance, it's desirable, but in Western-style dancing, it's very, very difficult to call if you're having good timing and phrasing, because so many of our calls take 3 beats and 7.5 beats of the whole bit, if you want to keep people flowing smoothly. So it's a very difficult thing to do, but there are tricks you can do to make it happen more than just by coincidence. One is particularly in the patter, but you're singing, or even particularly in the singing, you should be able to start every sequence that way. 2 is if you hit the Alaman left, right, your grand right and left will be on it. If it's not, well, if it's on it, you probably want to swing or do-si-do before the promenade, so the promenade will be on it. If you hit your grand right and left a little bit late, leave the do-si-do and swing off and take the promenade and take it there. So you can adjust different places to grab it where you can. If you get back home and want to start your next sequence, you can throw in an extra forward and back so you can start your square through on it. So you can adjust and make it and grab it where you can. If you're aware of it, it's a fun game for you to play, to challenge you. The last comment, and this one I haven't thought about as much, and I haven't totally formulated, and I'm not sure, but do the dancers care? We like to think they do. And I know when I contra dance, it's an important part. But I've been doing some thinking while square dancing, whether I feel the beat, whether starting, aside from a grand square, whether starting that square through on the beat or not makes a difference Do they feel it? And I think I've even seen contra dancers do beginning Western stuff, and they can get right into the good body flow and timing without worrying about the phrase. Now, let me point out one example towards that, and then I'll drop it. But we had a demonstration square trying to dance Jim Mayo's singing call to the phrase. We had one dancer sit down and want to listen to it because while she was dancing it, she couldn't feel it. It didn't make a difference to her. She wanted to hear it like the rest of the audience here was doing. And I, as I say, when I've danced Western, I think about the phrase, but my body doesn't, because I don't dance one call after another. I dance one smooth flowing dance all together. And so I'm not sure it's as important as I like to think it is.
Okay, we want to test some of that later in the session. That's kind of the goal of the session. But first I need to, you're going to have a couple more comments, Jim. You're going over for Butch.
Butch Adams, Alexandria, Virginia. This is an observation. Recently, I don't buy a lot of new records because I have 70,000 records at home. Because I started calling back in 1960, 1966, 67, I was record review chairman for NCASLA in Washington, D.C., and I got 80 records a month free, comp records. I go back to those records today and start using them, and they're still good records. And yet I notice that they really are conducive to doing the phrasing compared to the music that is coming out today. So when we buy the things we buy today, we don't have that good, strong phrasing on a lot of it. Some of it we do, but most of it we don't. But when you go back and listen to these older records and you listen to Sets in Order and you listen to the things that were done, it's there. It really is. I like dancing to the music. I like to get dancers up and say circle left and feel the music before I even start calling patter. I just don't say bow the partner corner and I say circle left, feel the music. Then I hear their feet and all of a sudden I hear a rhythm. When I hear that rhythm is when I start calling.
True. Did we have somebody first over here? Skip.
I'm Skip Brown from Portland, Maine. Just a couple of observations. The next time you up, when you've got a square of dancers, put on your hoedown record and call join hands, circle to the left, and watch the dancers. At beat 8, some kind of clock in them's going to kick. They're going to look at you, why aren't you telling me to do something? At beat 16, they're going to be kind of irritated because you haven't told them to do anything. Okay? I think the dancers do enjoy dancing to the phrase. It's hard as the devil to get them to dance to the phrase if you do stop and go dancing. If you got to wait until they get where they're going to see where they are before you call the next call, you've ruined the phrase. If you can just start calling and go smooth all the way. I know it's hard as a son of a gun to do. Sometimes I get very lucky and sometimes I'm not very lucky at all. But if you don't do stop and go dancing, you can get the dancers to dance to the phrase if you can hit the first beat, give them the first beat. And it's a wonderful experience, but you can't do stop and go dancing and get that effect.
I want to move on.
Okay, my argument has always been that if you give them beat 1 for the first step, they will get it more often as long as your timing is good. Last comment.
I'd just say I was at a dance, and I noticed the caller, instead of calling, was prompting on the phrase, and boy, did it feel good, because you knew I'm Sidney Marshall from Rochester, and it really felt good. There's always no one to step out.
Okay, so in organizing this, my first thing was to define phrase, give you the quote from Dick Ledger, do some dancing to Dick, do some dancing to Jim, show you the tech squares. There's another singing call. We agree that for the most part it was not synchronized to the phrase except near the end of each thing. And then I want to move on to patter calling because that's the part I think that I'm interested in. Is phrased calling worth it in patter calling? That's the experiment I want to ask. Rich has a question, but you got to be on the mic.
Rich Rio from San Francisco. I've been hearing a couple of people say that singing call that we heard the video was like way off or something, the phrasing. I would like to say that what that caller was doing was very well timed, and they gave the dancers beat 5. It's like the sub phrase. So if you listen to it again, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, head, square through 4, and 1, which is what we're all thinking is optimum, what they did was 5, 6, 7, 8, head, square through 4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay,
8.
so
on the phrase too.
Let's remember that comment, because I'd be interested to have us go back and watch it a second time and either clap every, chop or clap or look where we are every 4 beats rather than every 8 beats. And it also gets into something else that I wanted to do the experiment of slipping. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, let's consider patter calling, especially as square dancing is called today. Certainly all the calls aren't 4 and 8 beats long, and the timing generally won't line up so as to give the dancers beat 1. However, Jim Mayo has told me that he believes that some callers manage to have the dancers get beat 1 more often, and this gives a better dancer experience. You can see we were jumping ahead a little bit. Even in their patter tips. To be more explicit, here are some quotes from him interviewed in 1996. Bless him, don't get interviewed. Yeah. I danced as a teenager with Ralph Page 3 nights a week all summer long. I did that for several years. I loved every minute of it, and there was hardly ever a word changed in his entire evening's program. We danced the same thing over and over, but we danced it to live music. We danced it on the beat. It was unthinkable that a call should be given other than prompted before the phrase of the music. One of the striking things that nobody that came to New England commented on was the Alamo-style figure that rattled the rafters, and every dancer's foot hit the floor at the same time because it was never called off phrase. We no longer worry about the phrase. In fact, most callers take the first beat of music for themselves. They start their calling on the first beat of the phrase, which guarantees the dancers never get it, or at least if they do, it was an accident. Most callers will tell you, well, we can't maintain the choreographic variety and pay attention to that phrase. I think that's hogwash. I believe if even a moderate caller gave the dancers the first count of the phrase for the first step, they would get it more often, much more often throughout the rest of the dance than they do if the caller takes it for themselves on the first phrase.
Hey, I'm consistent.
So we come to the crux of our experiment, and this is where I thought some computer technology could help. Does phrase matter in the pattern portion of modern Western square dance tips, and do the dancers notice? So here's experiment number 1. Find a caller who believes he hits the phrase, for example, and who hits the phrase when he can, and analyze his pattern tip. Then we will know how often he gives the dancer beat 1. So that's the first thing, is I was going to do that, and we're going to, find someone, and we're like, look, I want to know a number. 40% of the calls delivered started on beat 1. Whatever the number is for patter. And then experiment number 2, and this is where my music editing knowledge comes in, record that caller delivering a good tip, recording the voice and music on separate tracks. Create new tips with the music shifted 4 beats ahead, or 2 beats ahead, or 3 beats ahead. Ask a square to dance these 4 different versions with all the different delays without telling them what's happening. When you walked in the door, we'd start with that maybe, and see if they notice anything, especially how the dancing feels. Doesn't that seem interesting? And we can do that so I've tried to do that before I came here. I made 3 attempts to perform experiment number 1. I recorded our local caller, Ted Lizotte, who we feel calls well-timed choreography and really knows his music. He doesn't claim to hit the phrase, but was willing to have me analyze some pattern tips and tell him what I found, and you. While not the tip I analyzed, you can watch one of his pattern tips here.
Trade the wave and you're ahead couple. Boys pass through, separate and get around one. Everybody gonna pass through. Crossfire. Boys swing through. Ping pong circulate. Extend, hinge, boy trade. Boy run around the girl. Chain down behind. What happened? Up to the middle and back. Panorama left through. Jumbo, pass the ocean, please. Ollie circulates. Swing through. AC-UC.
Someone, do you think we weren't getting the phrase? Okay, I could have been off. Michael's comment was it wasn't very strongly phrased music. Okay, and that, which I think it was recorded from way up top, and we didn't have a direct feed into the sound thing. When I watch, the music doesn't have a strong phrase. When I watch this with a contra caller who is good with finding the phrase and all that, and does dance occasionally to Ted, our analysis was he has no relationship with the phrase. And the dancers are not hooked to the phrase in any way. They're hooked to his voice. And we're synchronized and clapping and doing stuff, and the dancing feels good because we're tied to his voice, which is putting out a cadence and kind of its own phrasing to match to. So that was a failure. I couldn't find anything out of his thing. And when I taped him for a tip and tried to analyze it with voice separate from music, I couldn't get anywhere with it. Now, he didn't claim to be a phrase caller, so that's not surprising.
Perhaps, thought right here, with lightly phrased music, the caller can create his own phrase by the way he delivers the call. So that he picks a set of 8 beats and gives one of them a heavy emphasis, and 4 beats later he gives another heavy emphasis. Perhaps with a metronome-like phrase, beat structure, the caller can create phrases for particular actions. Just a thought.
Randy Page from Charlotte, North Carolina. When we're working with alternative music like that, I feel one of the keys as a caller that I think about is I have to overlay that music in order to create that dance experience. So I'm definitely seconding what you're saying. There's that the caller is creating his own phrase, his own overlay that's giving the dancer that effect.
Okay. The second caller I attempted to do this with, because I had recordings of him, was Sobalski calling Plus. And I wrote down, listen to audio tapes of John, tips 1 and 12, count by 8s, and the questions are, can we hear the music, can we hear the phrase, does his delivery relate to beat 1? And I think the answers to the first 2 questions are yes.
You found a partner at the corner, to the head, square through, go 4. Touch a quarter with the outside pair, follow your neighbor, then relay the deucey, left of course. I wouldn't have turned around, was I you? Left down the band with a corner, and a right and left grand. All 8 spin the top. Boy run right, handy promenade homeward. Get there, the sides go right and left through. Sides lead to the left and veer to the right. Men hinge, diamond circulate, flip the diamond, then fan the top. Recycle. Do a left, fan the top. Recycle. Do an 8-chain 1. Left down the band with the corner, go forward.
So, I'm sorry, did anyone want to dance that? That seemed from the audience and our smiles like he was hitting it more often than we might. This might be our best example so far of what we've seen.
Absolutely.
I in preparation, I'd say we should listen to tip 8. Let's just start the beginning of it. I don't remember the whats or whys. Oh, tip 12, excuse me.
If you're going to call to that kind of music, you better hit the phrase.
A good point.
You better let them hit the phrase because it's almost as strong as the first example we gave you. It's maybe even more so.
Here we go. Someone start the phrase counter going. Oops, why is it not doing it?
in the corner, 2, the head, square through, go 4. Swing through. Do an AC-doozy, and a right or left grand. And to promenade homeward go. Head pair, fan the top. Ping pong circulate. Extend, swing through. Spin chain the gears. Boy run to the right. Ferris wheel. Do a double pass through. Track 2. Explode the wave.
Okay. Rich has a comment.
Yeah, it's Rich again. I wish we could do the same thing again but count in 4s. And just say 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. I bet your success rate would be a lot higher.
Well, clearly, if we counted 2s...
Almost absolute.
If we counted in 2s, it would always be there because almost all of there's very few odd time calls. But I agree counting 4s is worth something, but the question would be, are we 50% on and 50% off the 4s, which means it's just random, or are we really on the 4s more often than not?
The question here is, think about when the dancers get to step the first step of a new action on beat 1. And you got a range of time. If the command is given so that they have a beat or 2 lead time, they may adjust because they like the phrase. So the fact that his call isn't exactly ending on the phrase doesn't mean the dancers didn't exactly take their step on beat 1.
Good point. Okay. I have one more example, and then we have to talk. Okay. So, well, I wrote under John's tips, can we hear the music? Yes. Can we hear the phrase? Yes. Does this call delivery relate to beat 1? The analysis I had done, we're coming to a different answer in here than the analysis I had done with my friend, where it came out, we're like, no, it just is wherever he is and is not necessarily tied. We felt that this type of delivery might be close enough to meet our goals of giving the dancer beat 1 for some of the time, right? And we also have still have that nagging issue of, is it on the 4-beat phrase or the 8-beat phrase? I agree that's a good thing to look at.
I think that delivery is as close as I would ever hope to get.
In modern Western pattern.
In modern Western pattern, to giving the dancer beat 1. If any number of callers could do that, I would be thrilled.
Okay. The third example I had, and assuming Jim's happy to do this, we have a video of Jim calling patter back in 1994, and that was at Papoose Pond. And let me cue it up. You can say something about it if you want to.
This is I don't know what the phrasing is in this, but the reason I called it to his attention, we came upon the video a while back, and as I watched this particular tip, it occurred to me it was a demonstration of as good a job of timing as I have ever done, and I think of myself as a pretty good timing caller. The thing to look for is the stop-go of dancers. The goal of all timing is to set the dancers in motion and then keep them in motion without interruption. That's what I try to do every time I call. I find it's a pretty rare experience for dancers, and dancers very often comment on this. These days, when I'm not calling for dancers who dance to me regularly, the most frequent observation I get from dancers is, wow, you're fast. The reason is because there is no delay that you normally see on almost all square dance floors these days. This is one where there's very little delay. You want to say something before we play?
Yeah. Don back again. Jim and I have talked before, but I'm wondering if we could do it here. Play this thing through 2 times, the first time without the sound. Without the sound, we'll show you whether the timing's good, and hopefully you will see one continuous movement and won't be able to pick one call out from the other. The thing I've never thought about while doing this is, will there be any indication without the sound about the phrase? And then we'll play it with the sound and see whether it comes through.
Let's see. For the tape.
For the tape, we're going to play this without the sound, so you aren't going to get anything for a while. Although maybe Jim will have his mic and maybe he'll say something or whatever.
What? Which?
What do you think the timing was on the beats per minute?
Tempo was probably... The tempo probably is about 124, 126 beats per minute. That's my guess. We could count it. Yeah, we're going to play it with music, so...
Yeah,
so
I think we have to
repeat for the people listening on the tape. The flow, it was one continuous movement from one call to the next. Timing was great. We don't know about the phrasing, but the timing it was fun to watch.
Correct. It seemed nonstop. There was a ping pong circulate, centers swing through, spin the top, right and left through. It all just moved right on through.
Yeah, ironically, it was dancing.
Okay, now we're going to play it with the sound on. Okay. I measured the tempo. 117. This was remarkably slow to me. But they were moving along and dancing, and there's a second piece later on the tape, and he calls much faster. So I have a sense that this could have been correct at the time. I mean, yeah. Any observations that we need to get on the tape from what we saw here with the music playing?
Just watching it and hearing some Michael Malton for it, hearing some of the comments that have been made, it occurs to me maybe the phrasing isn't as important as we think, because if it's good timing and if there's continuous dancing, well, what does it really matter whether you start one motion on one, whether you're starting the square through or some other part of the square through? If we're in continuous motion and not doing stop and start, why does it matter? I don't know if I've really got a point, but just a thought.
The point you're making is that timing is more important than phrasing. Let's go back here. We haven't heard from you yet.
John Maris, San Diego, California. It's kind of been touched on. Timing was more important than the phrasing, but when you had a choice, when you had the option, the phrase was there. You gave them beat 1. But in order to keep the consistent motion in our modern choreography, you had to just give the command whenever the dancers got, when the timing was right. Yeah. But when you had a choice, it was there.
Linda Maris. I am not a caller, and I can't find a beat to save my soul. For me, it's very difficult to hear a phrase, although I was able to in some of the pieces that you played today. For me, I need the beat. On the call like a grand square, I need that phrase. I need a strong phrase, and if it's not there, I need the caller to tell me when to make the corners, or I will be off in some square in the corner rather than the one that I started in.
I actually don't have a question. I have a kind of a statement. I've been a dancer for 40 years. I'm sorry, I'm Wendy Sauvé from Ottawa, Canada. And I've been a dancer for almost 40 years, but I've been a caller for about a minute and a half. So I feel really intimidated to be speaking about this. But for me, music is easy. I majored in music. I've got lots of music. But this calling stuff, this pattern and choreo and all of that stuff is overwhelming. But absolutely essential is the beat, because it's called dancing. And if you're throwing out calls any old where, any old how, then it's not dancing. Now it's just moving to music. So it's essential. And phrasing is not specifically necessarily 8 beats. Sometimes you'll get a piece that's 16 beats it's like a story, and it all goes together. And sometimes 64 and whatever else. But in every bar, in every 4 beats of music, there's a heavy beat, which is 1, and a secondary beat, which is 3. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you get in 2 bars, you're going to find that the 1 and the 4 is bigger. And so, like you were saying, Rich, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's important, as I was watching these things, sometimes you're calling something that's only a 2-beat move, like a star through or whatever. So yeah, maybe that's going to fall on, it needs to fall on the even or the odd number in the bar. So whether it's 8, 16, 32, 64, the dancer's foot needs to land on the odd number. So if you're doing a 2-beat call, something maybe 6 beats, you got to put another 2-beat in there to make up your 8. But you got to make sure the dancers, and it makes a huge difference as a dancer. Having danced to a number, never any of you guys, which is pretty awesome, but having danced to a huge number of callers, the dancer can see, I'm sure you guys all notice that too, you can see what's been a comfortable dance and what's been kind of wonky. And the wonky one is the guy that's just throwing out the numbers.
Certainly true. Thank you.
We're running low on time. Let me go a little further on the talk, and then we'll kind of hit the bottom, and we'll probably be able to use up the rest of the time with some comments. At this point, so we listened to Jim's 1994 patter. Can we hear the music? My answer was only okay. Can we hear the phrase? I wrote not well. Does his call delivery relate to beat 1? I wrote not really, or Lisa and I wrote not really. At this point in the experiment, I had the following observations. Dancers are taking 1 step for each beat of music. Callers are calling with the beat of the music. Caller is not tied to the phrase of the music, generally, on patter. Much of our patter music does not emphasize the phrase, and that's really important. And dancers are tied to the caller, not the music, for their phrasing. When Ted's going blah, 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 and Alaman left, and we go clap, we all clap at the same time. Why do we clap at the same time? We aren't clapping on beat 1. We're clapping because his cadence gave us exactly where to do it. I know callers who can't call so the dancers can all clap if they're used to doing clap Alamans together, and others who can. And that's a skill almost all of us should have where you're grouped to do that kind of thing. Because of these results, I'm unable to perform experiment number 2. Perhaps if John were alive, given what I saw in the room, I'd make an effort to record him music separate from voice and spread it around and do that. And frankly, if any of you have that ability, I'm happy to try to record you and do it. Here are my observations. Where do we go from here? Using the phrase is a second-order effect. Its benefits entirely lost with dancers who don't move with the music, meaning take one step for every beat, or with callers who exhibit stop-and-go delivery, which is a lot. We believe that these happen way too infrequently, and we should, or the stop and go, the stop and go happens way too often, and perhaps we should be working to eliminate that problem first instead of this meeting, which is either, a second order effect or preaching to the choir or whatever. Phrasing can be provided by how the underlying beats are delivered and emphasized. It can also be provided by the melody line. So one way we know phrasing, just talking about the 8-beat phrase, is if I only could hear the drum and some of the underlying percussion instruments, I might notice that beat 1's played louder and then beat 5 might be accentuated a little bit and the rest are even less. But if I also hear the melody, like in a singing call or whatever, I can sometimes pick out the phrasing because of the way the music's going, especially in contradance music. And those are two different ways that you can kind of hear the phrasing. When they're both together, great. If you don't have either of them, not so good. Some pattern records seem to repeat almost every 4 beats. There's really no melody going on there and stuff. The music has to be played loud enough the dancers can hear more than the beat. Often all we hear is the bass beat coming through or something, or the boom chuck, and we don't really hear. Someone put on a piece last night, and it took me halfway through. Frankly, I enjoyed the Canadian Callers dance, and when I thought about it later, I thought the timing was good. I didn't remember any stop and go. The whole thing I danced, I enjoyed it. But there was a piece of music that was kind of techno-y, and I thought, oh, this is cool. It wasn't until halfway through I recognized that it was U2, which I know, and I own the CD that song's from. I couldn't pick it out because of the strong instrumentation of just getting the beat across. So the music has to be played loud enough the dancers can hear more than the beat. Too many times all we hear is the caller with some music playing in the background. We can dance to the beat, but we can't even recognize the tune playing. And finally, my contradance experience has allowed me to be aware of the phrase in my square dance music while calling. I can tell when I happen to deliver the call and it hits the phrase. I feel that every time now when it happens. I can't control and make it happen. Often I'm reading challenge choreography. But if it's blah, 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 and, quarter the deucey, boom, there's beat 1. I'm like, I did it, or I lucked into it.
Let me insert a comment here. I think for me, that's the conclusion of greatest importance from this session, is that the caller can emphasize the phrase when you hit it. And by doing that, you give the dancers consciousness of it. And so we don't hit it all the time, but if we're sensitive to it, when we do hit it, we can emphasize, we can see to it that the dancers have the opportunity to feel it. And I think for me, that's the most important observation from this afternoon. Here's a new face. No, a new voice.
Hi, Richard Sharman, Ottawa. Could you just demonstrate what you meant by emphasizing it, just to make it clear? Like, do an example of sort of off, on.
I can try. No. Head 2 couples are right or left through. Gonna turn that Betty. Here's what you do. Turn to the corner. Left Allemande to the corner there. And when you meet, do a do-san-do. All the way around that girl. Take your lady and promenade. Promenade on 2x4. When my command arrives at the beginning of a phrase, I can just say it louder. And that emphasizes for the dancers, hey, guys, I made it. Butch will give you the first one this time.
I recently did a timing seminar, and I printed up a whole bunch of my sheets like that, put them in a box, and out of 13 callers in the room, nobody knew what they were. How many of you have used those sheets? How many have never seen those sheets? I personally can't imagine in all the years I've learned that I could never have done the timing that I did without first sitting down and doing a little bit of work on those 8 beats and fill out the words that I wanted to use, so that when I was taught, you did a word and you did bow to the partner, corner man, element of left with the old left hand, a partner right and a right or left grand, meet your honey with a do-si-do. That's the way I learned. Now, we don't do that today. That's okay. But we should still know how to do it.
In presenting material in magazines until the mid-1960s, all calls that were printed, all the routines that were printed in the magazines in Sets in Order and in American Square Dance, all were in 8-beat lines or 4-beat lines. But each line was there, and all of the extra words that he just recited for you were printed in the call. In the mid-1960s somewhere, they stopped doing that. They started printing the calls the way we see them now with just the commands. And that's because our style of calling changed then. It was no longer that we fitted things into the 8-beat phrases. And some of the records we get these days come without those delineations. Go.
Bruce in Ellicott City. I feel that whether it's on the phrase or not doesn't affect me as much dancing as it's got to be, I'll find a beat and make it continuous. Because when callers stop, I've got to keep my feet moving, or else I feel like I'm not dancing.
Certainly, as we've said, you have to dance to the beat. Beat is number one. Timing is equally in the same importance. The phrase is a nice luxury. Buddy, you want to?
Buddy Weaver. And historically speaking, from a musical standpoint, music changed in the late 50s because everything in square dance music was strongly phrased up until the late 1950s. And with the advent of modern Western square dancing, when we got away from the traditional memorized patterns, then as modern Western square dancing began to pick up and the square dance calls, the routines were broken down into components versus dances, the music then changed and became less phrased. And so all of the musical samples that I've heard are non-phrased. We used to call them the all-forgiving hoedown. It didn't make a difference where you were. You could fall in and fall out at any given moment, and the music would forgive you, and the dancers would be able to skip in, which is a 2/4 beat, which allows the dancers to skip right up to the step, versus trying to phrase to something like your 4/4 shuffle, where the dancers, if you're calling off phrase, which I don't know how many of you folks realize this, but your 4/4 shuffle rhythms, which most of your alternative music is, causes the dancers to have a marching effect. And the more you march them around and the less phrasing that you institute in your own calling and the more extemporaneous your calling is, dancers will start to stop marching and start meandering and walking through it. And you no longer have beat, you no longer have rhythm, and you no longer have phrase. So it's got to come back to the music. Thank you.
It's about that time that Cracker Jack came out with a couple of 6-beat phrases and a 10-beat phrase or two. Coming down to the wire. Don, you're probably going to...
I have 2 comments. One is on your recent demo, Jim, trying to emphasize giving the dancer number 1. I know you hadn't thought about it, but while you're doing it, I was thinking of it. You were emphasizing beats 7 and 8. My approach would have been to call it and turn the music up and be quiet on beats 1 and let them dance the phrase with the music. You can, yeah, but you wanted the dancers to feel number 1 with the music, not to get excited about your 7 and 8. So I would have stopped pattering on 1, 2, and 3 and turned the music up and let them dance to the music at that point. And that might be another way to handle it. Yeah. Now, what I was going to say earlier was, I was questioning do you really feel the beat, the phrase while you're dancing it? I'm almost wondering, and I saw it in some of the tapes and things, that because as somebody pointed out, nice flowing movement. It wasn't feeling one movement with another. It was one continuous dance. That if the caller takes number one, what I was going to say is callers, some of them cue, some of them chant, some of them sing a melody that's unrelated to the music, some sing a melody that's related to the music, sing with the record. And on those where the caller takes number one and uses the melody of the record, at least even if they're not feeling the phrase, they're being entertained more by you and the music working together, and they can appreciate the music. It'd be interesting to try and analyze the difference between those two approaches.
It appears to me that our session has created some further questions.
Yeah. So this is probably the right time to stop. The three things I had under if we had time is an example of a phrased traditional square, because many of the traditional squares are phrased, and you could hear what that sounded like, and I have an example of that. Examples of strongly phrased modern Western music. I brought Real Madrid on TNT, and String Along Hoedown also happens to be on TNT. I have a couple others that I think of as being strongly phrased, but it'd be nice if you wanted to give it a try to know what are some records. And the third experiment, which I've made Jim try in the past, is try calling patter music to strongly phrased contradance music, because the contradance music is definitely played strongly phrased. We actually had that last night. The last guy who went used Irish fiddler, and we danced to fiddle music, and it was played in a relatively strongly phrased way. So, but I've had Jim do that. I said, can you actually call patter to something like this? And we played it, and you were doing it, and it would have been interesting to try it. I thank you for your time. All the contra and traditional stuff is done to phrased music, and this dancing is synchronized with the phrase with set patterns. If you come to the dances tonight, you will hear some of that. If you come to the Zesty Contra dance, whether you dance or watch, my experience is many of our members who try it have real problems making their body move and go with the phrase of the music, because it's an unusual thing for them to do and feel. In that dancing, the music sets the boxes, and the caller reminds you of what call to fit into the box, and you don't just go to the next move because you're done with this one. You go to the next move because the music says to do it. We're used to being hooked to the caller's voice, not to the phrase of the music. And anyhow, thanks a lot. Thanks to my presenter, Jim. Yay. You guys did good.